Okay, welcome everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Megan Boyce Green. I'm the director of DEC's Rhinestone Woods Environmental Education Center just outside of Buffalo, and I'm really excited to have Sarah Berger here today from Push Buffalo's Push for Clean Heat campaign. She's going to talk to everybody about heat pumps. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. We'll probably save most questions to the end. But feel free to add whatever questions may come up as she goes along. So thanks very much for joining us. And Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, great. Thanks, Megan. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Berger. I'm the Director of Sustainability at Push Buffalo. Push Buffalo is a community-based organization at the west side of Buffalo that works at the intersection of climate, housing, and social justice. So I don't have a slide about the WebEx platform, but if you could just stay on mute during this call, because we do have a lot of people, and then feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat, as Megan said. So really quick, Push always loves to start with the framework of what we're talking about. And so that's the first couple of things I'm going to go through. I did kind of modify this based on some current some upcoming things, as well as some of the questions that popped through in the registration form, and just for the amount of people that we have as well. So what is Push for Clean Heat? Push for Clean Heat is one of the clean heat campaigns across New York State. And at the beginning, when we started this, there was 17 campaigns spread out all over the state. All of the clean heat campaigns, if they haven't wound down, are in their last year of operation. So this map on the right is the campaigns that are still live. And really what we're here to do is provide education and answers that don't come with a sales pitch about how residents in New York State can look at making the switch to heat pump technology and working towards the broader goal of getting our economy off of fossil fuels. But while these clean heat campaigns are transitioning down, it doesn't mean that we're leaving everyone in the lurch. We are currently in the process of launching the regional clean energy hubs. And the hubs are starting this year. They're ramping up, and all hubs will do a full public launch sometime. I believe we're targeting late spring, early summer. The difference about the hubs versus the clean heat campaigns is there's now coverage across all of New York State. So it was divided into 12 regions. And 3 of those are in New York City. The rest are spread across the state. And so at the end of this, we'll send out the slide deck as a follow-up, and you should be able to click this link to follow, to kind of find your local hub. And the hubs have a large, ambitious goal, but really the idea is to serve as a one-stop shop for New Yorkers to learn about state and local programs to help them weatherize their home, make the switch towards heat pump technology away from fossil fuel burning technology, develop our clean energy workforce, as well as provide information about solar and renewable energy. And Push Buffalo is the lead on the Western New York hub, and we have partnered with Cornell Cooperative Extensions over those 5 counties, as well as a couple other businesses and organizations to help us carry out the work. So why are we talking about heat pumps? Heat pumps are really, for us, part of a larger transition. So in 2019, New York State passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the CLCPA. And one of the big mandates of the CLCPA is that we get off of fossil fuels, adopt significantly more renewable energy, and that 35 to 40% of all benefit spending is directed at historically disadvantaged communities, which is NYSERDA's term. But whenever we're talking with people about heat pumps, you know, people have a lot of feelings about things in their home that utilize gas. And we don't want to judge those feelings because they're all valid. But one of the things I always like to tell people is it's important to remember that technology changes over time for the moment that we're in. And so I have the example of lighting up here, where if you think about how we lit our homes pre 1900s and then the transition over time, we've gone from candles and now we're in LED bulbs. And so there's been some benefits that come with that. And so heat pumps are kind of the same. We're just in another transition of the way that we're heating our homes. So with heat, we're talking about heat pumps today, but we're really working on the larger transition of electrifying our homes. And the reason why we need to do that is because in order to adopt renewable energy, anything that uses a fossil fuel as an input needs to be changed to something that uses electricity as an input. And this is a really big change. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not something that homeowners and building owners and renters are going to be expected to do overnight. So there's been a lot of talk about it's going to cost, $70,000, $100,000 to make this transition. But we're doing it over decades. And it really, the way that we make the transition is what works for you and your home and your family in the moment. So we're really looking at a much bigger picture. All right. So what are some benefits of a heat pump and why are they a great technology to adopt? So most systems will provide heating and cooling in the same system. And a lot of our homes, especially in older cities and towns, don't have cooling. And as our climate starts to change, cooling's becoming more important. If you currently heat with a delivered fuel like oil or propane, or you heat with electric baseboard, you will see energy savings. And one of the things that's happening right now is currently the cost of methane gas or gas, often called natural gas, it's been increasing a lot. And so there's going to be a point at which people who heat with gas will currently see savings. That's not necessarily the case right now, unless you have an incredibly old gas system. We also want to see cleaner air both in our home, in our neighborhood, and in the planet. So even when we have, sorry, even though we might have gas appliances getting vented out of our house, that is going into our neighborhoods and we're still breathing in those gas fumes that are getting vented from our house. And then a heat pump just gets you one step closer to being able to not utilize fossil fuels to condition your home. So I'm not going to touch too much on this. I just like to drop this slide so that people can kind of see the different pollutants that are associated with burning these fuels in our homes. And this is something that you guys can take a look at, once we send out the slide deck in detail. But overall, there's a lot of things that are listed here that we don't really want to be breathing in either our homes directly or in our neighborhoods. So the other major benefit of a heat pump, like I said, is being able to provide cooling. In the Northeast, we have a significantly older housing stock than in other places, and most of those homes don't have central air unless they're newer construction. And then the other thing to kind of note with this information is if you look over at how we heat our homes in the Northeast, we use a lot of fossil fuels and a lot of combustion to heat our homes, and we really want to move away from that. And then the other kind of interesting thing about this is that a significant amount of the households surveyed don't feel like their home is comfortable enough and have to use additional heating sources. And so we want to make sure that when we're making the switch to heat pumps, that we don't make the same mistake. We want the heat pump to be able to heat the home comfortably without using secondary systems. So you guys, some people might know this, some people might not, but most of us have a version of heat pump technology in our home. And that's our refrigerator, or if you have a conventional air conditioner. It uses the same principle of the technology. And so though cold climate air source heat pumps are newer technology, and though heat pumps are newer technology, um, the principle of it is something that we've utilized for decades. So we talk about two main kinds of heat pumps. There's an air source heat pump and a ground source heat pump. Um, the air source heat pumps, they often, if you see them, they look like air conditioning units on the sides of buildings. There's an outdoor compressor, and then there's an indoor distribution system. And the distribution system is just the way that the conditioned air is spread throughout your house. So it could look like ductwork, and it could look like what's called a mini split or a wall mounted unit. And then the other type of heat pump is a ground source heat pump. And the ground source heat pump, the major difference is it utilizes an in-ground loop or in water, depending on where you are, that basically the heat pump starts from the temperature of the earth, which in Western New York is about 40 degrees year round. It varies slightly across the rest of the state. And so the heat pump is heating from the basis of the ground's temperature. With air source heat pumps, it's using the heat energy from the air. So it heats from the base of the air's temperature. And they both work in New York State and in northern climates, but they have different operating costs because of the major differences. And then the other thing I want to note with ground source heat pumps is that there's different ways that what's called the loop field or the in-ground portion can be designed. And that's really based on your ground conditions as well as the installer's preference and what's available for the land that you are installing this on. And so I can't tell you if a vertical loop will work in your home because they have to do what's called like a geotechnical report where they review ground conditions, but that's something that your installer can kind of work with you on if you have specific questions on that. So heat pumps work by using refrigerant to transfer heat. And I don't want to get too into the weeds about exactly how that refrigerant transfer works, because I think there's other people that do a really good job at explaining it. I just dropped the link to my favorite explanations from this old house. It's a really visual demonstration that I think is a great way to learn about how about how the heat pump works. But basically, for an air source heat pump, a cold climate air source heat pump, the major components are the compressor outside and the refrigerant loop. And that compressor basically, it changes the pressure of the refrigerant, which allows the refrigerant to absorb, condense, concentrate, and transfer heat. And it works in both directions. So in the winter, it will transfer heat from outside to inside. And in the summer, it will transfer heat from inside to outside. So New York State is cold. And a lot of people are like, how can you transfer heat energy from the air? But there's always heat energy in the air unless it's what's called absolute zero. And heat pumps, cold climate heat pumps specifically have been rated for working at -5 and -15 degrees. And so when we're testing that cold climate heat pump technology, though the heat pump is less efficient at cold temperatures because it has to work harder to get from, let's say, -5 to 70 versus from 45 degrees to 70 when the outdoor air temperature changes, it can do it. And good installers should install what's called an auxiliary heat strip in your heat pump. And so if the heat pump for some reason can't work, or if it would be more efficient to use the auxiliary heat strip, then you can switch to that system. So just a little bit of an anecdote, Buffalo recently had a blizzard, and I was talking with our heat pump installer about how his systems held up. And he told me he was expecting all sorts of heat pump calls. And the calls he was getting weren't about the heat pumps, because what happened is that auxiliary strip kicked in when it needed to. And then the homes were able to stay as warm. He actually got more calls about natural gas or about gas generators going down than about his heat pumps going down. So that was really reassuring to hear. Of course, an air source heat a heat pump won't work if your power goes out, because it utilizes fans and things to distribute that heat. But your furnace also won't work when the power goes out, because it also needs fans in order to distribute the heat. So there's definitely some pluses and minuses, but overall, we know that cold climate air source heat pumps worked. They work in our climate, and they're utilized all over the world in much colder climates. So I just always like to show real pictures of the technology, because I think it's super helpful. So here is an example of an air source heat pump condenser. This is the outdoor system. They can also be mounted on the walls. Ahead, if you're worried about high snow, or if you live, for example, in a multifamily area and you need to space out the condensers. And then the mini splits, or the indoor distribution system, if you're not utilizing ductwork. Here's an example of a mini split right here. They make them for the wall. They also make them for the ceiling, and they also have floor mounted ones. And so if you're looking at a mini split as your distribution system for a heat pump, you can really identify one that works for the layout of your home. Typically, when you install mini splits, commonly you would put one in each bedroom, one or two in the living areas, and then a place like the bathroom would just kind of receive the heat from the rest of the house, unless you have some sort of ginormous bathroom. And then for ground source heat pumps, the indoor components look similar to a furnace. So this is the indoor component for the ground source heat pump, where the heat exchange happens. And then this is where it connects the ductwork to distribute that conditioned air into your home. And then another benefit of ground source heat pumps is they can actually also be sized to provide your hot water load in the same system. So, though these systems have a pricier, um, sorry, a pricier they're pricier to install. They have some benefits, and they also are much cheaper operating cost wise. I see some questions that I think make sense for me to answer right now. So I'm just going to answer the last couple. Cheryl, there should not be any release of refrigerants into the air. It's a closed loop system. And so that refrigerant just circulates in a closed loop. And then when it's time to dispose of it, installers have a process in which they're supposed to responsibly dispose of it. The other thing to note with refrigerants is currently we are in the process of phasing out refrigerants that had a larger greenhouse warming potential, and we're moving towards refrigerants that have a much lower global warming potential. And so refrigerants are not a perfect substance, but they are getting better all of the time. And if you look at the carbon footprint of a refrigerant versus a gas heating system, the refrigerants still show up better. And Denise, a heat pump can replace a gas system as well. I'll get to costs a little bit later, but it can replace any heating system. I was actually talking with one of my colleagues, and they replaced a couple of coal systems. And then over here is a picture of the in-ground loops. This one on the right is from a system that we installed at Push. So it was one of the first systems we installed. It's still going today. And that's the Director of Policy and Strategy in the hole right there. This is a horizontal loop. And so the area that this loop was on it had a larger lot adjacent to it that we could use. But if you didn't have a larger lot and ground conditions permitted, you could look at installing what's called a vertical loop, where they take this giant drilling rig and they dig a vertical hole straight down, and they install that loop, and then they seal up the hole properly, and it's a much smaller space. So there are options. Typically, you don't want to put a building or any sort of permanent structure on top of your loop field once it's installed, but you could have it be an area where maybe you have landscaping, maybe an on-ground solar array, or something that's not a permanent building with a foundation. So maintenance is a really important consideration with heat pumps, and with any system that you're installing, to be honest. You should always learn about maintenance. So for air source and any system that uses forced air, so even if you have your gas furnace, you should change your filters regularly. It's really important both for the efficiency of any system that the filters are changed regularly, but it also makes your system work less hard, and so it helps extend the life cycle of your equipment. And then just like your combustion equipment, you should be having your air source heat pump serviced once a year. It's a great thing to do in September before heating season starts, and that way if there's any little tiny parts that might look like they might fail, then you can go ahead and get those replaced before you're at an emergency in the winter where you have a no heat situation. And again, this is also something you should do for any fossil fuel heating equipment that you have. For ground source heat pumps, similar advice about the filters. And then for, regular system checks, this actually depends on your installer. Some installers will install a remote monitoring system where they can just, they have the monitoring system and they might get flagged when a pump goes down, or if, there's a fan that's out, and they can just contact you to schedule a replacement. Some just like to come out once every year or two just to make sure the system's running. So it kind of depends on the installer. Our ground source heat pump installer, when I was talking with him, said 80% of the calls he gets are about filter replacement. So when you're thinking about making this switch, there's a couple of things to consider. So the first is your heating distribution system, or how that heat is distributed throughout your house. So a lot of people might have a forced air furnace that uses ductwork that's spread throughout the house. Sometimes it's in the floor, the ceiling. Much older houses might have it in an exterior wall. And then there's also what's called hydronic heating, or hot water heating, where it's also called radiant heating sometimes. It depends on who's saying it. Where basically inside this baseboard radiator here, there's a hot water pipe that comes in, and it circulates hot water through the heater, and then it sends the water back down to the boiler to get reheated. This is also how radiant heating works as well. In the floor, it just, instead of being in the radiator, it's underneath the floor. And then there's also, this is a very old heater, so you might see newer ones that look a little bit like that. And typically those work in conjunction with a boiler. And then the last kind of common type of heating distribution is electric strip baseboard heating. If you currently switch with heat with electric strip baseboard heating, I would really consider looking at a heat pump, because a heat pump's about 3 times more efficient than an electric strip baseboard. And because you're not switching fuels, you should see operating savings pretty quickly. And the payback is also much quicker if you're heating with electric strip baseboard. I always like to tell people that this type of heating is basically like using a toaster to heat your house, where it turns on, it gets hot, it uses electricity to get hot, and then it turns back off. And it's a really inefficient way to heat. It's very cheap to install, which is why it's really popular in rental units. If you have hydronic heating, so any type of hot water distribution system, and you love it, um, right now, ground source heat pumps work great with that system. Air source heat pumps are in what I believe their second generation of being able to work with a hydronic or a hot water system. And I'm always a little wary of getting newer technology before they work some of the kinks out. So if you have hydronic heating and you don't immediately need to make the switch, it might be worth waiting a couple of years just to make sure that that technology is where it should be before you install it. Because these systems last for a while. And so we want to make sure that they work the best they possibly can when they're installed. Um, Another thing to consider is your the electricity system in your house. So there's two main considerations. The first is your service drop or your service point or your service feed, depending on who you talk to your house. So that's the wire that comes off the power line and connects your house to the grid. Some people might have it underground and they don't have to look at power lines, but depending on um, a host of factors, you may actually have to upgrade this service line. We're working on a project where we're looking at 10 heat pump installations across one neighborhood. And most of the houses have to have their service upgraded, but not all of them. And so it really is dependent. And it's a great thing to ask an electrician if they happen to be in your house for other things. The other consideration with electrical systems is your panel box. So first, if you currently have a box that still uses the fuses, the screw-in fuses, you're going to have to get that upgraded regardless. But depending on the size of your service, you may have to get an upgraded panel box to accommodate the heat pump and any future electrification that you're doing. And kind of the short explanation for that is if you look at all of these switches inside the panel box, each one is kind of assigned to something. And so if you have a house where all of these are spoken for and you have mostly gas appliances, you're probably going to have to add an additional panel box in order to accommodate like an induction stove and a heat pump water heater and all of those great things. And then if you have an older house that might have been wired by a do-it-yourselfer electrician, it is recommended that electric appliances have a what's called a dedicated circuit, which means it's the only thing that feeds into the switch. And so you may have to have some of your wiring modified if that's not the case. Um, it is very dependent on your household. So if you happen to be getting other electrical work done, it's always a great time to ask your electrician, like, hey, I'm thinking about making this switch. Um, do you have any idea about what I might need to do? Maybe they can even give you a quote. But this is something that when an installer visits your house to give you a heat pump quote, they will look at this as well. A good installer will look at this as well. So the other vital thing for heat pumps and really all heating systems is that we need our homes to be energy efficient and insulated. Um, I mean, first thing is we want our homes to be comfortable and functional. And so when you have an insulated home, it removes those rooms in the house that maybe never get warm or super hot in the summer, but it also keeps the heat that we're spending resources to condition the air, we're keeping that in the house. And so why it's important for heat pumps is because the more heat you keep in the house, the smaller your system needs to be, and it can operate the most efficiently and it'll be the most cost effective for you to install. If your house is not insulated and you find an installer who's willing to install a cold climate air source heat pump in an uninsulated house, you're going to end up paying for more equipment than you actually need to heat your house. And with fossil fuel heating, the royal we, as a society, got really used to oversizing our heating systems because we didn't really see any consequences. But that is now changing because one, we're wasting resources, but also as we look at making sure that our heat actually functionally heats our home, not insulating the houses has really been a detriment. So New York State has some programs that can help you weatherize your home. There are free energy assessments for most people. If you are a market rate and not an income qualified household, the type of energy assessment that you can get for free kind of varies. The state recently changed the way it works, and I'm not super excited about that change because it basically puts the onus on y'all to call the provider and ask them what they offer for free. And then not all companies currently who are listed offer free energy assessments. Um, so that's a little bit of a frustrating change. But then in terms of actually getting the work done, there's a program called Comfort Home Program where you can get incentives back to get your homes to certain tiers. And so an example of that might be you get $1,000 for insulating your attic towards that cost. And then once your attic is insulated, you can get another incentive that's unlocked to insulate your walls. And there's an additional incentive if you install a heat pump within 24 months. So if you're interested in that program, I dropped the link in the chat, and you basically fill out the short survey online. A contractor that's registered with the state will call you, and they'll come out, they'll do an assessment of your insulation in your homes, and they'll make a plan to and a proposal for you to get that insulation work done. And the Comfort Home program has no income restrictions. If you might be income qualified, or if you know someone who might be income qualified, there's two programs called Empower and Assisted Home Performance. And Empower is for the lower income people, and there's no cost. A contractor will come out once you fill out the application. They'll do an assessment of your home. They'll also like replace light bulbs while they're there if you have incandescent light bulbs. And then they'll give you a plan at what work they can do at no cost to you if you qualify for Empower. For assisted home performance, that's for people at a slightly higher income level, and it will cover up to 50% of the cost, up to $5,000 for qualified repairs. And if you're interested in applying for either one of those programs, you just use the combined application, which is really nice, and then they'll kind of refer you to whichever program is kind of the best fit. So maybe you're interested in heat pump technology, but you're not ready to switch your heating system. Maybe it has a lot of life left in it. Maybe your home, like mine, is very uninsulated, and it is going to be a long journey to insulate it. A heat pump water heater is a great way to test heat pump technology. Um, so this is a picture of one. It looks kind of similar to a typical tanked water heater. And the major difference is on top right here is that air source heat pump system where it's drawing in air. It's transferring the heat energy to the water to heat it, and then it exhausts the air that it's done with. Um, with a heat pump water heater, they work great in some spaces, but they don't work everywhere. So if you have a basement that you don't really, spend a lot of time in, maybe it's the place you do your laundry or store things, but it still gets a little bit of indirect heating, that is a perfect place for a heat pump water heater. You can't put them outside in an unconditioned shed. And you also don't want to put it in a conditioned space that you already pay to heat. So for example, maybe you have your heat pump or your water heater in a kitchen. I've seen those before. A heat pump water heater might not be the most efficient technology. One of the really nice things about the heat pump water heater is that it is the only heat pump that you can get an incentive for and not utilize a New York State clean heat contractor. And I'm going to get to the incentives in a minute. But basically, if you're a DIY person, you can install it yourself and then fill out the incentive form and submit it to your utility. Or maybe you just have a favorite plumber or a plumber that you prefer to use. They can also install it as even if they're not a registered contractor with the Clean Heat program. And as long as you install an Energy Star labeled heat pump water heater, you should be eligible to get the incentive. One thing I do want to flag here, because it's come up, I've gotten the feedback from people a few times, and then it's also popping off on the Electrify Everything Facebook, is the newer generation of Rheem heat pump water heaters tends to be really loud. And so if you're considering a heat pump water heater, it might be worth looking into not the newest generation of Rheem heaters. There's still plenty out there, and it seems to be a glitch in the way that they designed it. And so hopefully the next generation of Rheem water heaters will not have the same issue. So let's talk about money. So we get asked a lot about operating costs. And one of the things that I always like to caveat when I'm talking about operating costs is they are highly variable. So it depends on the size of your home, how insulated it is, the set point or the temperature that you like to keep your home at, as well as the efficiency of your system. So, for example, if you have a really inefficient old gas system and you switch to a heat pump, you're going to see bigger savings from operating costs than someone who has a very efficient gas heating system and they switch to a heat pump. So, there's a lot of moving parts in terms of the final operating costs. Installers do have different ways that they can kind of predict your operating costs or estimate them. They're usually some form of an Excel calculator tool or a software that's from the manufacturer of the system that they're going to install. And so if you're getting a heat pump quote, ask your installer for that information. The other thing with this slide is I did not have time to update it for statewide prices. So I am using Western New York prices that are from the New York State Fuel Dashboard. So basically, if you look at this chart, the major takeaways is that, so this blue line right here is a cold climate air source heat pump, right? And typically their operating costs they are more expensive to operate when it's very cold outside, and their operating costs go down as the air becomes more temperate. So, 32 degrees. Oh, Megan?
I was just going to say, Sarah, there was a question about that. So basically, I think you're sort of answering the question because it was, what does it mean that heat pumps work harder in cold weather? Does it mean it requires more electricity?
So it does require more electricity to heat when it's colder out, which is why it costs a little bit more to run. That is correct. Just because, so basically the air source heat pump is heating from the air's outdoor temperature. And so if it's 20 degrees and you want your house to get to 70 degrees, there's a 50-degree difference. If it's 5 degrees and you want your house to get to 70 degrees, it's a 65-degree difference. Whew, I hope my math was right on that. And so it just has to work harder to make that jump. But it's important to remember that cold climate air source heat pumps are made to be efficient at lower temperatures. There was a previous generation of heat pumps that were really designed for the middle Atlantic and like more temperate regions. And those systems don't work great here. So it's really important when you're thinking about air source heat pumps, you're thinking about cold climate air source heat pumps. The other thing I should mention on this chart is I don't have ground source heat pumps on here. Ground source heat pumps are incredibly easy. to or they're incredibly efficient to run. And so that line would be down here if I did drop one in for ground source heat pump. So with the other heating fuels, this is methane gas, sometimes called natural gas, and it's still, according to this tool, cheaper to heat your home with methane gas. When I started the Clean Heat campaign for Push a couple years ago, this line was actually down here. And so it is ticking up over time. And I wish I had actually kept the previous iteration so y'all could see the change. For delivered fuels like propane and heating oil, those have gotten significantly more expensive in the few years. And so if you're someone who heats with propane, you should see a decent amount of savings on operating costs when you make the switch. And the same thing with heating oil. I do get asked about payback a lot, but just like operating costs, payback significantly varies. And so I don't have a good number on that right now.
Can I share my experience?
Yes,
Might be
please.
helpful. So I had a very old fuel oil furnace and an old central air conditioning unit. And we replaced that. We did the math. We looked at getting like an efficient air conditioner and an efficient fuel oil furnace and compared it to what it was going to cost us to get an air source heat pump. And it was going to be about $1,000 less than getting an air source heat pump. So we bought the air source heat pump. And then somebody at Push asked me to like figure out, did you save any money? And we had saved like 800 and some dollars the first year when we looked at our electric bill for the whole year versus our electric and heating bill for the previous year. So basically, in less than 2 years, we had saved that extra money that we paid for the new system. And presumably, we're continuing to save every year.
Thanks, Megan. That's really helpful. Um, so if ground source heat pumps were to be on this graph, they would be at the bottom. And so they are less expensive to operate than a gas system. All right. So people always want to know about money. And again, this is going to be highly variable based on your home and existing conditions, as well as the systems you install and a lot of other factors. And so if you're really looking at nailing down the cost of these systems, I would recommend getting a quote from a vetted installer. And these numbers are based on quotes that I've seen, both for work that we do at Push. And then one of the things that our campaign does is if someone has a heat pump quote they don't understand, they can send it to me and I can talk about it with them. And so this is from actual quotes that I've seen. So for a ground source heat pump, before incentives, the cost is between $25,000 and $60,000, potentially a little higher if you were to have really unique ground conditions, or in some areas it's kind of hard to get a driller right now. So it is a pretty big cost, but once you put in that in-ground system, that loop, you don't put that in a second time. And so as the indoor components wear out, because all mechanical components wear out, when you have to do a replacement for the system that's in your house, it's much cheaper. So you're not going to be seeing this cost twice, is what I'm saying. So there are a couple of different financial mechanisms, and I apologize, I just realized my slides aren't updated. So there's incentives from the utilities in New York State, as long as you are in an area where you pay what's called an SBC charge on your utility bill, the systems benefit charge. If you live somewhere that you have municipal utilities, some of those areas are eligible for incentives and some of them aren't. That's something that the installer can confirm for you. There are federal tax credits, and they are now part of the Inflation Reduction Act. So that can, if you do have enough of a tax burden to make those credits worth it, that can really help counter some of the costs. And then this third point I have, this funding actually expired, but we're hoping to see it renewed. So keep an eye out on our social media. If they renew it, we will release that information again because it's a significant amount of money. And then for an air source heat pump, they're about $10,000 and up if you're doing a whole house system. 10,000 is a number that we recently got for probably, I want to say it was 1,000 square foot apartment. And those numbers vary for multiple reasons. Depends on the system and your installer, but then it also depends on if you have to make any modifications to your distribution system or if you're going to be installing those mini splits. Because the mini splits is like a tiny piece of machinery, so there is an added cost with that. And one of the things that I didn't mention when I talked about distribution systems that I meant to is if you currently have your house heated with ductwork, and you want to utilize that ductwork, your installer who's giving you a quote is going to look at that ductwork and it might need modifications. Older ductwork wasn't really installed in the same way that newer ductwork is. It's not as planned out, and heat pumps need a certain amount of balancing. And so if your installer makes some recommendations for ductwork improvements, they just want to make sure that your heat pump is going to function well and efficiently. So in terms of the incentives, which I've talked a lot about, there's been some changes with the incentive programs that have made it a little confusing. Unfortunately, some of the utilities decided that they wanted to do their incentive programs differently. So if, for example, you live in Con Ed territory, they at one point doubled their incentives and then ran out of money. And so they abruptly cut them off, but then they decided that they were going to release more money. And so if you're pursuing this system, these systems, whenever you get a quote, your New York State Clean Heat installer should basically, they'll give you a quote where, you know, it's $10,000 for an air source heat pump, and then they'll subtract the incentive, the clean heat incentive, and that money should come off your bill. So if you have a $10,000 quote, the incentive is $1,000, you would pay the installer $9,000, and then they would get that $1,000 from the utility. So that's typically the way it works. Installers all write their quotes differently. And so if you don't see it, don't assume they're not including it, just ask. But every once in a while, there's one that maybe forgot to include it or decided not to for some reason. So it's always good to ask. But with the incentives, they basically are based on the type of the system you're installing and then its capacity to heat your home. So in this first line of the table right now, for cold climate air source heat pump, if you install what's called a partial load heat pump, so maybe you have an area of your house that's not connected to ductwork and you want to install an air source heat pump just for those couple of rooms, that would be considered a partial load heating because it only takes part of your whole house load. And so you just get basically $500 per condenser that you install. If you install a system that is capable of heating your whole home, and that it meets the requirements of the program, you get $1,000 per 10,000 BTUH. That makes no sense to people, but basically, the bigger the system that you need, you get more incentive. And typical incentives that I see on these are between 1,500 and let's see, $1,500 and $5,000 for air source heat pumps. It just varies on the size of your system.
Sarah, I just don't want to do a time check. It's 12:51, so I just want to make sure we end up with time for questions.
Okay, I'm going to speed through this. It's based on the size of your system, and that's why the installer needs to confirm that. You get a slightly higher incentive for the ground source heat pump, and sometimes it's actually better if you go through the custom incentive route. So if you're looking at a ground source heat pump and your installer gives you two possible routes, they're just trying to figure out how to get you the biggest incentive. If you currently have a fossil fuel system that you're not ready to completely get rid of because maybe you're worried about those really cold days, or you're skeptical of the technology, or you want to keep your operating costs low, you don't have to remove your fossil fuel heating system to get the incentive for a full load heating system. However, some of the utilities have actually released an additional incentive for decommissioning or getting rid of fossil fuel equipment. So that's just a consideration to have. And then, like I said, with the heat pump water heater, this is the only one that you can either install yourself, or you can have your favorite plumber install it, and you get $700 off the cost of the water heater itself. There is a little bit of financing available through a program called Green Jobs Green New York. I'm not going to go into detail about that. I will, as a follow-up, send the link if you're interested in that financing, but it does mean taking on debt, and you do have to pass a credit check. All right. So the last thing I should probably touch on is the Inflation Reduction Act, because we get a lot of questions about that. The first is it's really important to ask whoever does your taxes if the incentive will work out for you. We are not tax professionals, and we are not financial advisors. The second thing that I always like to tell people is right after they passed it, I got a ton of phone calls from people like, should I immediately like just install this system? It is a couple of $1,000s, which is nothing to sneeze at. But when you're looking at making a major purchase and a major modification, it might not be something that you jump right into just for the couple of $1,000s, because there's still a significant cost that comes with it. And as a follow-up, I will send my favorite resource for the Inflation Reduction Act information. And I'm done. So, Megan, you want to throw some questions out there?
Sure, I'll try to go through the ones that have come in on the chat first, and then people can feel free to add more. Also, I should mention I'm probably going to send out a survey later this afternoon to anybody that participated. It'll be very short and just ask what other kinds of talks you might be interested in. So look for that this afternoon, and we'd appreciate if you could fill it out. The first question was about if heat pumps work for a radiant floor system. Versus just working for forced air systems.
Sure. So a ground source heat pump will work really well with that system. For an air source heat pump, they're still in this like the second generation of an air to what's called an air to water system, because you're taking heat energy from the air and you're transferring it to water. And so that's actually, I have hydronic heating, and I would talk with an installer who has a history of installing these systems, but it might be worth waiting another year or two just to get the next generation of that system to get a more optimal technology.
Okay, and I think you answered this one. How well does the heat pump work when the electricity goes out? Wood heat is our backup heating source and tends to work well when there's no power. I can tell you from us, we have a generator, we have a gas powered generator, and we knew it wasn't going to work to run our heat pump. So we bought some small room electric heaters, and we actually did have the power go out last year for a couple of days and just used those little heaters, and we're pretty comfortable. But our house is very tight. We did a lot of the work to insulate our house before we got the heat pump. So that's my experience. I don't know if you want to add anything, Sarah.
So I do want to add two things. I think your point about your house being very tight and doesn't have a lot of drafts and it's probably very insulated, that's really important whenever you're thinking about your heat going down in general. And so when you're thinking about what am I going to do when the power goes out, that's, making a plan to insulate your home is one of the best things you can do. Because even if you have a generator, like a bunch of generators failed during the blizzard, and then battery systems are coming down in price, but they're still pretty pricey. And you would need a fairly large battery system to operate an air source heat pump. If you were to install a ground source heat pump, you would need a much smaller backup battery system. And so that does balance out. But all technology does have the ability to fail. So I just want to caveat that.
Yep, even a generator.
Mhm.
I think you answered this one too. Can you build on top of the underground loops for a source heat pump? And I know you said you can't put a permanent building. You could put like a temporary shed though, or could you put like a garden as long as it wasn't deep rooted? Like how deep is the system?
Yeah, so the depth of the system varies by your ground conditions. So you can definitely put landscaping on top of it. There might be some issues if you have like very old tree roots. But it's basically it's a passive loop. It's just like plastic, it's thick plastic tubing that's in the ground and then it just stays there. Um, so you could put like if you had a small shed or something temporary, but you can't dig in a foundation and like build another house on top of it. I think if you were worried about your ground space and you were looking at a ground source heat pump, you would reach out to a clean heat installer in your area and just say, hey, do you do vertical loops? And they actually could take your address and like run it through this software and see if they could do a vertical loop where you live, if that's something that they install.
Right. Do you need to cut a hole in the wall when installing a mini split?
Mm. Um, don't I would not use the phrase cut a hole in the wall, but basically, here, let me go back really quick. There we go. Ugh, sorry guys, WebEx and me, we're getting to know each other a little bit. So basically with the holes, if you have an air source heat pump, you have the outdoor compressor. If you have a larger home or like a very segmented home, where it doesn't have like a lot of open floor plan, you might need more condensers. Um, but so basically, this line right here is what's called the refrigerant line. Um, it's really like this big with insulation. The actual refrigerant line's like super tiny. Um, and so this hole would get drilled in and then it directly connects to the mini split. But that hole should be small and sealed. It's not like cutting a hole for a window.
Yeah, and I can say on your diagrams here, you have the pipes are in green to sort of make it clear so you can point them out. But I've seen houses with mini splits and they usually just paint it the same color as the house and you don't even notice it's there unless you're looking for it, I feel like. So,
Yeah, and they do make covers for, they're called line set covers that go over these to protect them. And then good installers should make them look very neat. If you go around, you see bad installs where there's like lines everywhere. And that's something that you should definitely ask your installer where they want to put the condenser and then where the lines will be. Um,
okay, somebody
okay.
somebody asked how often does the refrigerant have to be renewed?
So refrigerant levels are something that during a check, your installer will look at. It's a closed loop system, so there really shouldn't be a lot of refrigerant charging or renewing that happens unless there's a leak. So it's unlikely, but every once in a while it happens. It's the same thing with a conventional air conditioning system. Um, but in theory, like the only time, like they usually get charged at the factory, they're sent, they're sealed, and then if you get the system removed, then the installer takes it away and disposes of it. But you don't like put in refrigerant every year or anything.
Okay, and somebody asked a couple technical questions. How much is the approximate labor cost for installation of an 1800 BTU system with two mini splits? And then do you have an idea to find an installation and maintenance technician for a reasonable cost? So I guess what advice would you give for that?
So the first thing I'll say is I'm trying to actually remember. I might have had a quote that's similar to that, but I'm having trouble pulling it up in my head right now. What I say is whenever my background's in residential construction, and whenever I'm doing anything to my house that I'm going to pay over $1,000 for, I get multiple quotes. And I don't always choose the cheapest quote. Sometimes the middle quote's the one I want to go with, and so I would always recommend getting multiple quotes. I would also recommend using an installer that has been installing heat pumps for a while. So if it's their first year of installing heat pumps, maybe you don't want to be their guinea pig. Maybe you do. So ask them how long they've been installing it, because that can prevent the need for callbacks and additional labor needed. And then in terms of like how much does labor cost, construction escalation and labor costs is in such like a weird state right now that I cannot give you a good cost, because it really depends on like if you're in New York City or like near Albany or anything, or in Western New York and in the North Country, like all of those costs vary like pretty vary a lot. What I will say to kind of close the loop on this is, to get the incentives, you have to use a New York State Clean Heat installer. That's just an installer that's registered with the state and that undergoes some quality assurance checks on a percentage of the systems that they install. And they also know which systems will meet the requirement. And so I'm going to send a follow up to Megan to share with all of you guys. And in that, I'll include a link to a Clean Heat and the New York State Clean Heat installer list. The other thing is, if you are near somewhere that currently has an active Clean Heat campaign, all of the campaigns have vetted installers. So we interviewed our installers, we checked some references. And so if there's someone in Western New York who wants to install a heat pump, I have a contractor that I send them to for that. But I will always encourage people, just get multiple quotes on any work you're doing. Because there also might be different timelines where some contractors can't install for 9 months, whereas some might have availability in 4 months.
There's a couple kind of related questions. One is, does groundwater salinity affect ground sourced heat pump? So like if it was installed in an area with high roadway runoff, that might be real salty. And then someone else said, I was considering installing a ground sourced heat pump at a remote Adirondack location. One concern was leaking ground loop, contaminating soil and drinking water wells. So do you have any information about either of those things?
So for the question about salinity, the in-ground loops should be installed like pretty significantly below ground. And so a lot of those immediate conditions wouldn't affect that. And then they're made of a pretty thick plastic that's meant to be in the ground with limited leaching. I don't want to say no leaching, because you can never say something's 100%. Um, they're made to be in the ground for 100 years. And so if you think about that plastic's rigidity and then the idea of like like groundwater salinity, that shouldn't affect it at all. And then the question about contamination, the ground loop heat pump installed by if it's installed by an installer who has experience in these systems, there should be no leaking. It's a closed loop. And so I think if you're looking at that, it's just really important that you find a contractor who has a history of doing that in your area. Um, and you also, sorry, I lost the last thing I was going to say to that. So I'm going to end that answer.
It's okay. Couple more pairs of questions. Someone was asking about the Inflation Reduction Act and if there and federal incentives, but I think you just covered that. And somebody was asking for a link to the specifics for the federal tax incentives. Is that something you want to just give me? I know you said you were going to share your favorite. I could put that in the email to everyone if you
Yeah, I
want to.
can I can send you that link. It comes from Rewire America.
I've
Um,
seen that one. It is good.
yeah, they put out a really great exhaustive document, and it's actually what a lot of people who are in this work are using, because they did the deepest dive on the policies. The
Okay.
other thing that's a little frustrating is there's still some details that have not come out about the Inflation Reduction Act. We're still waiting for the IRS to release them. So if you have really specific questions and you don't get a good answer from a tax professional, it might be because that detail hasn't been released.
Okay. And then there's two questions that are basically asking, and I think you kind of answered this. If you have baseboard hot water, would that infrastructure still be usable if you replaced an oil hot water furnace with a ground sourced heat pump? Um, the related question was, again, just if you have a radiator, so that in this case heated with gas, you know, is there an option other than getting all new ductwork or mini splits?
So the one thing with the term radiator is some radiators use steam heating. It's not as common in single family homes, but if you utilize steam heating, you cannot use that same infrastructure for a heat pump. It just like it doesn't get hot enough. Neither one of them will get hot enough. But it will get hot enough for hot water heating or hydronic heating. That just has to get to 180 degrees, and that's doable. And then the one thing to think about with the air to water heat pump. So if you want to use an air source heat pump for your radiant hot water system, is they're not as efficient yet as they will be because the incoming groundwater temperature is really cold here still. And so that's kind of what we're waiting for the next generation to address is a really efficient way to raise that incoming groundwater temperature.
Okay. Someone else asked, can you repeat or clarify if ground sourced heat pumps are more or less expensive than natural gas?
Ground source heat pump will be more expensive than if you are looking at a gas furnace or gas
Okay.
boiler.
So it's more
Yes,
expensive to install, but then once it comes to operating, is it cheaper to have the ground sourced heat pump in terms of operation?
operating cost is much cheaper.
Okay.
Oh,
That's-
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so it's kind of like you pay more to put it in, but you're gonna pay less to run it. So I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, the other thing that I should have mentioned when people are asking about hot water or radiant or hydronic heating is that if you want the cooling function, you have to install a mini split or ductwork to get the cool air. So if you have the hot water baseboard, like it doesn't work to just circulate cold water through it to make your home cooler. There's a long story behind that if you really want to get into building science. Anyway, so if you're looking at a ground source heat pump system and you want to keep your hydronic heating, but you still want cooling, you will have to look at getting mini splits or ductwork installed.
That's a good point. I wouldn't have thought of that. Can you drive over a ground loop system if you need to access a septic system for cleanout replacement? Does north-south exposure matter?
You can drive over them. There may be a consideration about weight, especially if you're repeatedly parking vehicles on it. But there's no issue with driving over it. And like the loop field that we have on one of our properties, like people are definitely driving cars on that. So
Good to know. Okay. Can you talk about the priority electrification areas incentives? Apologies if this was already mentioned.
the pri repeat that one more time.
Priority electrification areas incentives.
I am not familiar with that term. Um, the one thing I'm thinking you might be meaning, feel free to correct in the chat, is there are areas in New York State that either don't have access to gas or they don't want to expand the gas systems. And so some of those areas do have an option for an increased incentive.
Okay. And I haven't heard of it either, so I'm sorry. It won't be any help either. Someone asked if a ground source system leaks, does it poison the water table? I guess you kind of answered that already.
Should be a closed loop system if it's well installed. There is one that is much less common where you have a loop that is in a body of water. Um, you'll be hearing about these, but actually the way that they're looking at using them is in sewage because sewage has a lot of heat that we're just losing. And so this type of technology is being looked at for that and less so about like going in a lake.
Okay. Yeah, somebody else had mentioned what are they using for the refrigerant and ground source heat pumps? We had a case of groundwater contamination where a system leaked in our area. Will this be like the old gas tanks that got put in the ground and forgotten until they leaked 50 years later?
They should not leak. And the thing that what circulates inside is like a tiny bit of antifreeze mixed with water. And so it's hard to think about comparing them to like how toxic some of these in-ground oil tanks are. It's not completely benign, but they really shouldn't be leaking.
Okay. I recently installed a mini split and I'm using about 50 kilowatts per day. I was a little surprised by this, thinking it would be more efficient. Can you speak to their daily energy usage?
So mini splits, they are very convenient for certain, they're very convenient in certain ways and then less convenient in other ways. And one of, as I talk with people who install heat pumps and especially who install heat pumps in housing they have to manage, mini split usage can have a much more variable effect. And so, Rich, there'd be a bunch of questions we'd have to dig into. One of them being, are these connected to a thermostat or are you using the remote? And are you, maybe set it like you set it off when you leave the room, but then you want to crank it up. And so air source heat pumps work best. Set it and forget it. Pick a set point and then just let it maintain that temperature. That might be part of it. The other part when it comes to energy efficiency is it depends on how efficient the system that the like condenser in the system itself is. So you need more information about like if it's supposed to be a really efficient system and it's not operating the way that it should be, that could be an issue. And actually, I was talking with a different installer who he installed mini splits all over his house and used different fittings to connect, like different fittings to connect it. And he actually found that one fitting was significantly more efficient than the common one. And so I would say that if you're seeing really high bills you didn't expect, I might have that installer revisit the system just to make sure that it's operating as it was installed. And then the other thing is make sure you're changing that filter, or most mini splits, it's a rinse type of situation, but make sure you're cleaning that filter out because the mini splits, especially if you have like a lot of pets or a really old dusty house like mine, it's gonna um, fill that filter up and it's going to make it run more efficiently if it's pulling air through a really full filter. And then the other thing that might affect the efficiency is the location of the condenser. So if your condenser is in the windiest side of your house, that will make it operate much less efficiently than if it's in a spot in your house that might, a side of your house that might be less exposed to wind. Um, so I would see if you could get that system troubleshooted. And if you're not happy with the installer, potentially have another installer come check it out. But hopefully you're still under warranty. And then the last thing is make sure that the room that it's in, or rooms, because that's a bigger system, um, they're insulated because there were a bunch of installers that were going around and telling people that like you can put a mini split anywhere and it's energy efficient, and they weren't even reviewing the home for how weatherized it was.
Great. I think the only other question was somebody had asked if they could get a copy of the slides. Um,
Yep. I will send them, Megan, before the end of the day, I can send you a PDF of the slide deck and then the links that I was mentioning. I can get that
Great.
to you and then you can get it out to everyone.
Great. So thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everyone for asking these really great questions. So I will be sending everybody an email that has the quick survey, and then we'll link to all the information that Sarah provided. Please do fill out the survey and let us know, what other topics like this you'd like to hear about, and we'll see if we can arrange another one because we had so much interest from DEC. But I really appreciate this, Sarah, and I wish everybody luck on your converting to electrification journey. So
Yes,
have a
thank
great
you so
day.
much.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks for
Bye-bye.
joining, everyone. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.